Thanks, you too. I mean, good night. Alright. Where are we at? Turn this down a little.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Be sure to call them when you get to work.
Call?
Yeah, to make them know that you got there.
Oh, yeah, okay, I will. Alright. What did I want to do? I guess I'll play Cody's theme, right? Yeah, we'll play the Cody theme. Sorry, Dan Sleep. Three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Damn, my nose is huge. Okay. Okay. Alright, Lawant. This is for Lawant. He wanted to know how to read and kind of download an opponent based on how they're playing a neutral. Right? So I'm just going to explain my method. Alright, so the first thing you look at is generally their movement, right? And what they do right off the bat. You're trying to tell, how good they are as fast as possible. My cat's playing with this toy. How good they are as fast as possible. And there are certain ways of telling, right? Like you can look at their movement, like, oh, big wavy movements from this far away. Is there any reason for this? No, not really. He's giving up his screen space. Maybe his decision making is going to come often, you know, and maybe they're not actually in his best interest, right? So you could tell he's probably going to do some typical things early on, you know. That would be my guess right off the bat. Like, oh, well, he's not really even aware of the screen space. I guess he'll just take the corner. You know, I'll just walk up, take the corner. Okay, whatever. You got 99 seconds, right? So this is just one little thing. Now, there is always a possibility, right? That he might jump. Right? If he's jumping right at the beginning of the round, the only two possibilities it could be, right, are one, he's a very risky opponent, aggressive, right, and the least likelihood would be, this is a part of my strategy, right? So if it's a part of his strategy, it kind of turns everything on its head. We'll talk about that after. But right now, if somebody jumps, the signs they're giving you are they're aggressive, right? So if they are aggressive and they jump in the beginning, right, it tells you they're active, it tells you they're aggressive. What are they going to do on their wake up? Probably something that's inclined towards aggression, right? And what you're going to find out is, say they wake up jab, say they wake up light DP, which a lot of players actually do. It's actually quite often they'll do meterless DP, right? Right on wake up early on to throw you off and whatever. And I would say this is more inclined towards players who do play aggressive, right? And do play active in the neutral, right? They don't have to play active, but they can. Yo, what's up, player one? So, what was I getting at? Okay, so it would lead you to believe, okay, on wake up he's going to do something aggressive. I better do a meaty on wake up. Now, everybody says usually jab, right? Sorry, usually throw, right? You would throw on wake up. Right? You would normally throw. I actually change it up a little bit, right? I follow my strategy. And the reason why is because most of the time I do find that it works. Like a high percentile of the time it is working. And the times I stray away from the strategy are actually the games that are very... It almost like hurts, you know, because your strategy works all this time and then you stray away from it just because you have a feeling, you know, they're not that strong of a player, you know that, and then you stray away from the strategy and you end up losing because of it, you know. So I just tend to follow the strategy until I'm told otherwise, right? But basically, aggressive, active, meaty early on, right? So the reason for this, right, is to cover those aggressive options. Okay, so he's playing aggressive. Let's say it doesn't work. Okay. And you were supposed to have that snowball pressure in your favor, and now you don't. Well, now you know, aside, what the strategy tells you is instead of playing off of how he plays in the neutral, he has tendencies he falls on, right? Because if he's playing how he feels, he's playing aggressive, he should do an aggressive option, generally, right? It's almost like when something quick is happening, right, and something goes wrong, players DP a lot. They're inclined to play how they feel, right? So it's like, in this moment, the guy's playing aggressive, then you should generally be able to meaty them on their wake up right then. And if you can't, if you don't meaty them, you know they're doing another option. They're a very active player. The likelihood is that they will do something on the wake up, right? And what it tells you is, it tells you he's most definitely doing another option. It might not be that aggressive. It might be something that's tendency. So let's say he is aggressive. In the first wake up, he didn't do anything, right? And then you find out he throws. Like, oh, it's kind of funny. He's a really aggressive person, then he's doing he's doing a defensive action on wake up. Then you can tell, okay, since this is tendency, and since he's a very active player, the likelihood of him teching is actually very high. So, sorry if the strategy seems a little complicated, but basically what you are dissecting is three things, right? How are they playing in neutral? That determines what they're inclined to do on wake up. This is the strategy I follow anyway. And then number two, what are their tendencies? So how are they playing, which leads you to your options, and then what is their tendency that actually contradicts it, right? Those are the two biggest things. And the third one is just how good are they, right? How good are they? Are their movements clean? Are they playing for time? Are they choosing not even to commit? Right? When you can see these things, right? When you see that open up, then in clutch situations you can tell how good they are, you know? And you can tell whether or not you're overcommitting or undercommitting, right? When you're supposed to. Okay. So let's say he's like a really good player, right? He's playing aggressive this whole time. And I know that on wake up he kind of catches on, right? That I know he's playing aggressive, right? And then when I think he's going to wake up DP, he EX command grabs me, right? I should be able to tell that only if I feel like he's a very strong player. And you'll see Nicolas do this. Like Up to Snuff, my friend, he actually does that a lot. And the reason why is because he knows that you're aware that he's super aggressive, right? On defense too, right? So if he's doing delay button most of the time, and then you think, I just meated him, the next option he's going to do is EXTP. Because he's a very good player and he has that insight, he will EX command grab. Because you're baiting. See? So that's where how good they are makes a big difference, right? That's another piece of the strategy, you know, that has to be held up. But yeah, okay, just to go over the super basics of the strategy though, you're just trying to find out, this is a good thing to practice, is are they active, are they passive, are they aggressive, are they active, are they not active, are they aggressive or passive, right? And you can just tell that in what they're doing in the neutral, right? So you just base it off the time, and if they jump right at the beginning, right? If they jump right at the beginning, you can tell, oh, aggressive. And then immediately he does something else like Seismo. I'm like, oh wow, okay, he's pretty active and he's relatively aggressive. He's doing these options close to each other, right? I just started, dude. I'm about to end it soon though. Well, basically, if you see that he's doing these things in close succession and they're relatively on the aggressive side, you can guess what they're going to do on wake up. And all this strategy is supposed to do, right? Actually, I'll go into the passive part. Let's say he doesn't jump, right? Let's say he's staying grounded. Some people take a long time to even realize that an opponent won't jump at all, right? And that's because they're not paying enough attention. You have to know these things. You have to know, is he walking back a lot? If you let them just walk back and then you walk back, you never take the screen, then random things happen. They seem random, right? But if you take the screen, the likelihood is that you're going to win because they get to the corner more. So, if you notice he's not jumping, you're like, okay, he's not jumping. Relatively passive, okay. He's using projectiles, but they're like reasonably spaced out. They're very hard to get a read for. Okay, this guy's playing passive, you know? Then on wake up, you would generally go for something like, you know, a throw. You'd be like, okay, he texts. Maybe he's more active than I thought, you know? Little things. Actually, he definitely wouldn't tech there, but that would be a tendency thing. If he's not playing active and then he texts on wake up, even though he's passive, you would say, okay, that kind of falls away from strategy. That means it's a tendency, right? So let me move, let me knock him down, boom, passive, boom. Depending on how passive he is, that determines I'm going to go for another throw. See? Is he going to walk back, right? Depending on how passive he is, I change up my options here, you know? So if he's not that passive, he's a little passive, and then he's switching, right? He's becoming less passive. Depending on how I feel, what I think about it, right? After a throw, I'm like, he doesn't have that much patience, right? He's gonna start walking back. All right. It's like a constant teeter-totter, right? Of like, are they aggressive? Are they passive? What are their tendencies, right? So generally, when something falls away from the strategy, right? Let's say he's defensive, right? And then he does like a delay jab. Then you would tell that that's probably a tendency. You know, and generally how you beat tendencies is depending on how active they are. Like if they're doing options a lot within like a small period of time, you can tell that they're very active. So the likelihood that they're going to do their tendency as opposed to how they're playing a neutral is pretty high, right? So you would go for like if they do delay jab, you would do like delay frame traps, stuff like that, or just throw right away. You know, you just beat their tendency. And you might think, oh, well, what if they turn random? What if they start playing random? What if they're passive and they just start DPing and dashing on me? Well, the reason why, actually a big problem I had for a long time was you have to understand tempo switches, right? So if you're following the strategy and you keep realizing that the balance is tipped way out of your favor all of a sudden, like they're in the corner, they V-trigger, and boom, it just turns into nutso, you know, them jumping in, dashing, command grabbing, then you realize that you have to have a read on when they switch tempo, right? And when somebody plays, how they play aggressive and how they play passive can be completely different, right? That's why when you play someone like who's a, let's say a chem player, right? Once they activate and they just turn nuts. It's alright, dude. You could watch the VOD. But basically, let's say I do this, right? And he's real close to stun, and he's been passive this whole time, and then boom, EXTP. Dash up, heavy kick, activate. Super aggressive. All of a sudden, right? And now it's in his favor. And he, let's say, his offense, right? It's very likely to be aggressive at this point. You know, whether or not it's correct or whatever, but it's very likely to be aggressive. That much you can tell. Applying the strategy I mentioned, right, where you watch the neutral and then you base your offense on beating passive options or aggressive options and how often they're going to come based on how spaced out their actions are, that will work most of the time. Unless they're doing like some weird counter strategy. However, if you don't watch for the tempo switch, you can lose to anyone. Because part of downloading the player is knowing when they've had enough. Right? Reading EXTPs. Reading V-trigger activations. Right? These things are super important. So, unfortunately, it's actually very hard to read a tempo switch if you're pressuring them constantly. If you're guessing right over and over again, if the strategy is working, it's actually very hard to read that. So that's why a lot of comebacks, they seem random, is because you'll get them the stun bar, after guessing right 3 or 4 times, right? And then immediately they activate, boom, and they guess right, and they guess right, and they guess right. And it's because you haven't had, it doesn't seem rational in your brain to say they're going to play completely passive at 1 second and then aggressive the next, right? But you have to kind of get in your head that sometimes you just can't see it, right? Where you see a bust out, and then, okay, you just have to realize, okay, he's playing aggressive now, you know? Then you have to play you have to change your logic, or you have to change everything, right? And kind of make your decisions inclined to him playing aggressive, right? I'm not saying shut down all of your like pokes and neutral, right? Don't do nothing, but you have to become passive, right? That's the only way to beat it, so, unless you can see read his mind, right? But there was something I was gonna say, it's super important. Oh, right. Let's say if you're lucky enough, right, to be in the neutral. And one character you could look at for this is like Birdie, right? This is why it's important to look at how they move. This is how you can read like a tempo switch, right? Let's say they move like this in the beginning. Okay. And then the second time, right? This is where the tempo switch is happening. You realize he's moving differently. He's close to stun, right? You go back to neutral though because you guess wrong. He has meter. Let's say he's moving like this. Then you can guess something uncharacteristic is going to happen. Something that hasn't happened in the match yet, right? This generally tells me that, say if I'm playing a Birdie or something, if I'm playing a Kali, if I'm playing a Kuma, those EX moves are going to be coming, right? EX Dolphin Dive, the EX Headbutt, Bullhorn, right? EX Demon Flip. That's when they're going to come, right? When they start to move differently, because that tells you the tempo has switched, they've had enough, and they know that they have to have something happen. They have to make something happen, right? So that's just a small way to cover the tempo switch, and there are ways to blow up the tempo switch. I'll go into it in another video. It's a little harder with Cody than other characters, but yeah, basically, the most important things are you want to watch: are they passive? Are they aggressive? Are they active? Are they passive? Are they not active? Right? And what are their tendencies? How good are they? And when does the tempo switch come? It seems like a lot to watch. You do get better at it as time goes on. And I think the most important thing, though, is to really understand you have 99 seconds. You know? But the game, as it is like really an exchange. That's why I don't get mad, right, when random stuff when I feel like random things happen. And I lose at 76 seconds, right? Because I know it's my fault. I know I could have made that last longer. I know I could have read it better, you know? If I got crush countered, I could have been more passive, could have waited more, could have played for time. And the likelihood of me getting crush countered is far less, you know? There's always something you can essentially do. But yeah. This is generally how I diagnose people, right? But yeah, if you do find your options aren't working, right, when they're playing aggressive or they're playing passive and they're active, right? If they're passive and they're active, but they're not really doing any defensive options and they're just taking the throw, you could tell that actually blocking and not throwing, not teching, not doing anything is actually sometimes a tendency. So that's why there's certain players that you could just throw the shit out of them. Right? A tendency is part of their strategy sometimes, right? So it's like they're just inclined not to tech because, well, they've been shimmied to death so much, right? So they just know take the throw is what they follow, right, until death, pretty much. So you can pick up on that very fast if they're passive. So they're passive and neutral. They take the throw, and then you realize, oh wait, why hasn't he tech the throw even though he's passive? Why isn't he walking back? Okay, he just takes the throw all the time. Whatever, I'll just kill him like that. right? These are the people you can kind of just throw to death. The weird one, though, there are certain weird combinations that you'll find, right, in tendencies. And these are people you'll find, like, in ranked, right, who maybe they're not very good, right? And I don't mean it as a slap in the face. I mean it more like they're very hard to read, right? However, maybe their skill isn't as equal as people would think, right, for how much they win. I would say they're kind of a Rubik's Cube that's hard to crack, right? And they've learned this playstyle over time because it's worked. There's a lot of players like that. It's just what works, and they just continue, and they kind of find a good flow chart for it, right? And you'll come across it, and the strategy generally helps beating that if you stick to the strategy. But sometimes it's kind of hard to guess. Like, for example, if they're super aggressive, but they just block. If they're super aggressive, but they actually never do anything on defense, it's very weird. So there are these weird things that will happen from time to time, and you just have to be quick on diagnosing whether or not it's a tendency or what, you know. I do come across people like that. It's just very, very, very rare, you know. And usually the only time it does come up is if it's a particular matchup, right? So if it's a bad matchup, and let's say you're playing against Bison, right, and he's playing super aggressive, but he actually doesn't tech or anything, right? You're like, that's kind of weird, you know? Usually every other Bison either mashes backdash, mashes light, or V reversals right away, or techs, right? They just roll their head on the stick, right? When they're super aggressive, it doesn't seem they know that much, right? But instead they're just blocking, taking every throw when they're playing super aggressive. You're gonna find people like that, right? Those tendencies. So just basically realize you only got 2 games, you know. So the download has to be fast, and you have to kind of know in detail what they're gonna do. So that's just kind of a basis for how to download someone quickly. Again, my biggest the biggest thing I would say to have a takeaway from this, though, is to play for time, right? When you're learning the strategy, playing for time is actually the best thing you can do, because it gives you like a better understanding of players, you know. It's not about winning, right, against a large vast of players. It's just beating the player in front of you, you know, and you have to download them in order to do that correctly if you want it to help you when you go to tournaments, you know. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got. There are strategies that kind of fall away from it in terms of how you use fireballs, how you play neutral, little things like that. And you could generally judge those as tendency of a player, right? So I'll just go into this really quick. I gotta go, but let's say I'm playing super passive, right? I'm playing super passive, and I don't use too many fireballs, right? Let's say I haven't used any. Actually, I'm playing against Nikali. And then in my head, I'm like, let me just see how many fireballs it takes for him to jump. A lot of players do this, right? They usually do it wrong, but say I throw a 1. I'm like, okay, he's not jumping. I bait, nothing. And I just throw a 2. And you're like, what the heck is going on? It's not necessarily that I'm being aggressive. It's that it's a part of my strategy, right? So it's a tendency of mine, right? It's something I like to do that falls away from how I play usually in neutral, you know? So it's uncharacteristic. It's something I'm practicing. And if you can kind of get a read as to why is a player doing this, generally you could take a lot of ground for it. And how you would do that, right? If you're realizing it's a trick, right, that they're doing, that they're playing on you, like for example somebody waiting really far for the anti-air, things like this, is you just judge how good they are. You can judge, you know, so you're judging them by the movement, etc., little things like this, by their spacing, and usually you can see through their tricks, right? So if I just start throwing fireballs when I haven't thrown them before, you can kind of guess, okay, maybe he wants me to jump, you know. He's pretty good, you know. He would anti-air here. Let me just walk up and take ground. You see? Most players that won't be the case, but when you do come across these players, you'll realize pretty quick who's good and generally who's just kind of playing the game, you know. But yeah, that's my little tutorial on how to download people. As far as strategies and stuff like that, those things change. But yeah, the reason why I kind of made it as is because I don't want to play players based only on their tendency and write down notes on the player, because how they play changes and varies on the day and how they feel. So how someone plays in pools might vary on how they play in top 8s, you know. So this is the best way, I think, at least for me, to download them. But yeah, anyway, I gotta go to night shift. I gotta work. So, good night.